Imagine you're on your way to work. It's a Monday morning. Spring is just starting to arrive in Tokyo. The air is cool. The city is alive. Millions of people doing exactly what they do every single day. Getting on the train, heading in. Normal, you find a spot to stand. The car fills up around you. Briefcases, backpacks, the quiet scroll of newspapers. And then, somewhere near your feet, someone drops a small plastic bag wrapped in newspaper onto the floor. You might not even notice it. And then the person who dropped it, they get off at the next stop. They walk through the station doors, step into a waiting car, and disappear. The bag stays, and inside it, something that will change Japan forever. This is the story of Aum Shinrikyo, a group that started as a yoga class and ended as something the world had never quite seen before. A religious cult that built its own weapons of mass destruction and used them on ordinary people going to work. How does that even happen? That's what we're here to find out. To understand Aum Shinrikyo, you have to go back to one man, Chizuo Matsumoto. Born in 1955 in Kumamoto Prefecture, in the south of Japan, he was the fourth son in a large poor family. His father made tatami mats, the woven straw floors you see in traditional Japanese homes. There wasn't much money. And then Chizuo was born with a condition called infantile glaucoma, a disease that destroyed the sight in his left eye completely, and left his right eye only partially functional. When he was just 6 years old, his family sent him to a boarding school for the blind. He didn't go home much after that. At that school, Chizuo had something the other kids didn't. Partial sight, he could see a little. And in a school where most students were completely blind, that gave him power. He bullied other students. He took their money. He understood, early, how to use an advantage to control the people around him. He graduated, moved to Tokyo, failed the entrance exam for the most prestigious university in Japan, started a small business selling herbal remedies, and then got arrested for selling fake cures, fined, humiliated. The business collapsed. By his late 20s, Chizuo Matsumoto was a man who had failed at almost everything he tried. But somewhere in that failure, something was brewing. In 1984, he opened a yoga studio out of a rented apartment in Tokyo's Shibuya district. Small, unassuming, just a place to stretch, breathe, and find something meaningful in the chaos of modern life. And people came. Japan, in the 1980s, was a strange place to be young. The country was economically booming. This was the era of the bubble economy, a time of almost unreal prosperity and material wealth. And yet, a lot of young, educated Japanese people felt completely empty. They'd spent their childhoods grinding through one of the most intense education systems in the world. They'd been told that success meant a prestigious university, a corporate job, a salary, conformity. And many of them had done all of that and still felt like something was missing. They were hungry for meaning, for community, for something that felt real. Asahara, the name Chizuo had now given himself, shedding his old identity like a skin, understood this hunger perfectly. He grew his hair and beard long. He wore flowing white robes. He spoke about meditation, about enlightenment, about breaking free from the materialism of the modern world. He claimed he could levitate, that he could see into the future, that a trip to India had led to a meeting with a god. And people believed him. Not just a few people, thousands. His followers weren't lost souls on the margins. They were engineers, doctors, computer scientists, lawyers, highly educated people who looked at this strange bearded man and saw something genuine, something transcendent, something that all their degrees and career paths had never given them. By 1989, the Japanese government had officially recognized Aum Shinrikyo, which translates roughly as Supreme Truth, as a legitimate religious organization. That status came with enormous benefits: tax exemptions, legal protection, and crucially, the government was not allowed to investigate a recognized religion's internal activities. It was a shield, and Asahara knew exactly how to use it. For a while, Aum looked, from the outside, like an intense but mostly harmless new spiritual movement. Communes were established, members donated their possessions, sometimes everything they owned, to the group. They lived together, practiced rituals, studied Asahara's teachings, which blended Buddhist concepts, Hindu imagery, Christian apocalyptic prophecy, and the writings of Nostradamus into something that was entirely his own. But beneath that spiritual surface, Asahara's worldview was getting darker. He began predicting that the world would end soon. Not metaphorically, literally. A global war. Nuclear destruction. And out of the ashes, only Aum members would survive to build a new civilization under his leadership. In 1990, Asahara decided to take his movement into politics. He personally ran for a seat in the Japanese parliament, along with 24 other Aum members. They ran campaign events that looked more like theatrical performances. Members wearing giant Asahara masks, dancing in the streets, chanting. They lost. Badly, every single Aum candidate was rejected by the voters. And something in Asahara changed after that. The humiliation was total. He had believed genuinely that the Japanese people would choose him, that they would see what his followers saw. And they didn't. If ordinary society wouldn't accept him, then maybe ordinary society deserved to burn. What happened next is the part of this story that still doesn't quite feel real. Even when you know all the details, Aum began building weapons. Not improvised, amateur weapons. Serious, systematic, industrial-scale chemical and biological weapons. The cult recruited scientists, actual PhD-level chemists and biologists, and put them to work in secret laboratories on the slopes of Mount Fuji. They attempted to create anthrax and botulinum toxin. They tried to obtain samples of the Ebola virus, sending members posing as aid workers to Zaire during an outbreak in 1992. And they worked on sarin. Sarin is a nerve agent, a substance that disrupts the way your nervous system works. When it enters your body, through your skin or your lungs, it causes your muscles to seize. It makes your eyes contract until the world goes dark. It floods your body with fluids it can't control. In high doses, it kills within minutes. In the late 1930s, chemists in Germany discovered it accidentally. While researching pesticides, governments around the world classified it as a weapon of war, a substance so dangerous it has been banned under international law. Aum was making it by the kilogram. The first time they used it was June 27, 1994, in the city of Matsumoto, about 175 miles northwest of Tokyo. Aum was involved in a civil lawsuit, and the judges handling the case were expected to rule against them. So, cult members drove a converted truck into a residential neighborhood near the judge's apartments and released sarin into the night air. 8 people died, hundreds were injured, people who had no idea what had happened to them, who simply went to sleep and didn't wake up, or woke up in agony without knowing why. Investigators were baffled. Japan had no framework for this. No one seriously imagined that a domestic religious group had just carried out a chemical weapons attack. The evidence pointing toward Aum was there, but authorities didn't act decisively. The case stayed open. Aum walked away, and they kept going. By early 1995, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police were quietly building a case against Aum. They were investigating the cult's involvement in the kidnapping of a man named Kiyoshi Kariya, a 69-year-old whose sister had tried to leave the group. Kariya had been grabbed off the street in broad daylight, taken to an Aum compound, and murdered. His body had been destroyed in a microwave-powered incinerator. A massive police raid on Aum's facilities was being planned for mid-March 1995. Someone inside law enforcement tipped off the cult. Asahara made a decision. If the police were coming, move first. He called a meeting of his most senior members. He chose 5 of them for the operation, men who were deeply, completely devoted to him. A cardiovascular surgeon, a scientist, an elite academic. These were not desperate or unstable people. They were highly educated men who had surrendered their judgment entirely to a man they believed was a living God. They were given their instructions, and they went home to prepare. Monday, March 20th, 1995. It is 7:46 in the morning. Tokyo is in the middle of rush hour. The city's subway system, one of the largest and busiest in the world, is carrying millions of people. office workers, students, parents. The trains run with clockwork precision. This is Tokyo. This is how it always works. 5 men board 5 different subway cars on 3 different lines. Each man is carrying small plastic bags of liquid sarin, wrapped in newspaper to look like nothing. One man, Yasuo Hayashi, is carrying 3 bags. The others carry 2 each. They ride in silence. They don't speak to anyone. They look like everyone else. At a pre-arranged time, each man sets his bags on the floor of the train car. And then, quietly, each one takes the sharpened tip of an umbrella. They'd sharpen the tips in advance and punctures the bags. Then they get off the train and walk through the station exit, where a car is waiting to drive them away. The bags stay. The liquid sarin starts to evaporate. At first, no one understands what's happening. The trains keep moving. People start feeling strange, eyes burning, vision going blurry, a sudden constriction in the chest. Some people feel nauseous. Others begin convulsing. A few collapse on the floor of the train car. The trains pull into stations and the doors open. Some people stagger out onto the platforms and collapse there. Station workers rush over to help, and some of them fall ill too, because the sarin has spread onto clothing, onto shoes, onto the floor of the platform. 2 station employees who tried to pick up the punctured bags with their bare hands would die later that day. Within minutes, subway entrances across central Tokyo look like something out of a war zone. People are lying on the ground outside, gasping. Emergency services are overwhelmed. Ambulances are racing from station to station. Hospitals have no idea what they're treating. Many doctors in Japan had never seen a nerve agent poisoning before. Some patients are given the wrong treatment at first because no one knows what's in their bodies. That morning, 688 patients are taken to hospitals by ambulance alone. Nearly 5,000 more arrive on their own, walking, stumbling, helped by strangers. 13 people die. Dozens more will carry permanent damage, vision problems, neurological effects, post-traumatic symptoms for the rest of their lives. A study conducted a decade later would find that survivors were still experiencing significant physical and psychological effects. Years after the morning, they stepped onto a train to go to work. Japan was in shock, not the kind of shock that fades quickly. Deep, lasting, structural shock. Because Japan in 1995 was a country that prided itself on being safe. Genuinely, remarkably safe. Crime was low. Public spaces were trusted. The subway was a place of routine and order, a symbol of everything Japan had built in the decades after the war. And in a single morning, that sense of safety had been torn open. It wasn't just the violence. It was the nature of the violence. A weapon of war, on a commuter train, used against people who had done absolutely nothing. There was no warning, no grievance you could point to, no logic that ordinary people could reach for. This was a group that believed it was accelerating the apocalypse. That killing innocent people was a spiritual act. There was no framework for that. Not in Japan. Not anywhere. 2 days after the attack, police launched a massive simultaneous raid on Aum facilities across Japan. At their compound near Mount Fuji, investigators found something astonishing. An entire industrial operation, chemical synthesis labs, stockpiles of precursor chemicals, equipment for producing sarin on a scale far beyond what had been used in the subway. If this raid had come even a few weeks later, the scale of what Aum was planning might have been almost unimaginable. Members were arrested. The senior scientist who had produced the sarin confessed. And then the doctor who had carried one of the sarin bags onto the subway, Ikuo Hayashi, one of the country's top cardiovascular specialists. He walked into a police station and told them everything. He said Asahara ordered it. He said all of them had been following Asahara's orders. On May 16, 1995, nearly 2 months after the attack, police raided the Aum compound and found him. He was hiding in a small sealed room inside the building, a space built specifically to conceal him. He was sitting in the dark, silent, wearing orange robes. He tried briefly to claim he was too blind to be responsible for anything. Nobody believed him. The trial that followed was one of the longest and strangest in modern Japanese legal history. Asahara became progressively stranger in court. He stopped speaking coherently. He mumbled, He appeared to be completely detached from the proceedings. His lawyers argued he had lost his mind. Prosecutors argued he was performing. In 2004, after years of hearings, Shoko Asahara was found guilty of masterminding the subway attack, the Matsumoto attack, and a string of other murders going back to 1989, including the killing of a lawyer named Tsutsumi Sakamoto, who had been helping families try to get their loved ones out of the cult. Sakamoto, his wife, and their infant son were all murdered. He was sentenced to death. For years, appeals delayed the execution. One by one, the legal challenges were exhausted. And then, on July 6, 2018, more than 2 decades after the subway attack, Shoko Asahara was hanged in Tokyo. 6 more senior cult members were executed later that same month. That man who had been a bullied child in a school for the blind, that failed salesman, that yoga teacher who told people he could levitate, he was gone. But the story doesn't end cleanly there. The group that Asahara built, it still exists. After the attacks, the cult rebranded, first as Aleph in 2000. A splinter group called Hikari no Wa broke off later. The Japanese government has kept both organizations under active surveillance for years, and as recently as 2019, courts confirmed that the surveillance should continue. Estimates suggest hundreds of active members remain. Hundreds of people who still, in some form, maintain a connection to the belief system that produced the worst domestic terrorist attack in Japan's modern history. And that raises the question that I keep coming back to when I think about this story. How? How do brilliant, educated people end up there? How do doctors and scientists and engineers, people who have dedicated their lives to knowledge and helping others, end up puncturing bags of nerve agent on a crowded morning train? There's no single, simple answer, but there are pieces. The cult didn't start with nerve agents. It started with yoga, with breathing exercises and meditation, and a community of people who cared about something more than career ladders. The early days of Aum genuinely offered something real: connection, meaning, a sense of being part of something larger than yourself. The horror came gradually, through a process researchers call incremental commitment. Each step into darkness was only slightly darker than the last. By the time someone was helping manufacture sarin, they had already crossed 100 smaller lines, and at each step, Asahara was there, telling them that this was righteous, that this was sacred, that they were the enlightened ones and everyone outside was lost. He also isolated them. Members who lived in the communes were cut off from family, from outside media, from any perspective that wasn't Asahara's. Their thinking was shaped entirely within a closed system that he controlled. And in that closed system, everything, even murder, had a spiritual justification. That's the terrifying thing. Not the weapons, not even the attack itself. It's the human capacity to be led, step by step, into something monstrous, while genuinely believing you're doing good. The survivors of the Tokyo subway attack have carried that morning with them for 30 years now. Many still deal with physical symptoms, chronic fatigue, vision problems, sensitivity to light. Many were never fully compensated. A nonprofit called the Recovery Support Center has spent decades tracking their health, trying to make sure the people who were just riding the train to work that Monday morning in 1995 are not forgotten. One thing that comes through in survivors' testimonies over and over is the confusion of that morning. Nobody knew what was happening. They just felt suddenly, terrifyingly ill, surrounded by other people who were also ill, in a space they trusted completely. The subway was safe, and then it wasn't. That loss of trust in public spaces, in the idea that life could just go on normally, that might be the deepest wound Aum inflicted on Japan. Deeper than the physical injuries, deeper than the death toll. Japan has rebuilt that sense of safety over time, but the scar is still there. What stays with me about this story is that Aum Shinrikyo is so easy to dismiss as a bizarre historical footnote, a weird cult in a foreign country 30 years ago. Eccentric people in white robes following a man who claimed to float, but that's exactly the kind of dismissal that lets it happen again, because the conditions that created Aum, the longing for meaning, the distrust of modern society, the search for community and certainty in a confusing world, those aren't unique to 1980s Japan. Those are permanent features of the human experience. They exist right now, in every country, in every generation, and there will always be someone willing to offer simple answers to complicated questions, to promise belonging to people who feel alone, to tell you that the outside world is corrupt, and the only real truth lives here, inside, with us. The names change, the spiritual packaging changes, the platform changes, but the mechanism is ancient. And it works on smart people just as readily as it works on anyone else, maybe more readily, because smart people are often very good at constructing reasons why what they're doing makes sense. The real lesson of Aum Shinrikyo isn't about chemical weapons or subway systems or even cult psychology. The real lesson is simpler than that, and harder. It's about what happens when a person who has been hurt, who has failed, who has been made to feel small, gets power, real power, over real people, with no one to stop him. Chizuo Matsumoto spent the first 30 years of his life being told, in one way or another, that he didn't belong, that he wasn't enough, that the world had no place for him, and he took all of that, the rage, the humiliation, the hunger, and he built a world of his own, a world where he was God. And he made that world real, horribly, lethally real. On that Monday morning in March, on trains somewhere under the streets of Tokyo, 13 people never made it to work. Thousands more stumbled out of the darkness, gasping for air, changed forever. And a country that had never thought this could happen to them learned that it could. That's the part that stays with you. Not the ideology, not the theology, not the strange man in orange robes who claimed to be Christ. Just the bags on the floor, the sharpened umbrella, the train that kept moving, and the people who had no idea